Chapter 1: The Science of Macroeconomics. Let's begin with an overview of what macroeconomists study. Macroeconomics examines the economy as a whole, focusing on broad aggregates and key economic indicators, often referred to as the Big Three: growth in incomes, changes in the overall level of prices, and the unemployment rate. Macroeconomists aim not only to understand how the economy operates, but also to devise policies that can enhance economic performance, promoting growth, maintaining price stability, and reducing unemployment. Different models are used depending on the time horizon. Models with flexible prices describe the economy in the long run. Models with sticky prices describe the economy in the short run. Macroeconomists often track real GDP per capita to measure changes in average economic output per person over time, adjusting for inflation. This figure shows the trend of U.S. real GDP per capita over the past few decades. You can find this data on FRED by searching real GDP per capita. For example, calculating growth rate from 2000 first quarter to 2025 first quarter. Knowing real GDP per capita as of 2025 first quarter is $68,872, and real GDP per capita as of 2000 first quarter is $49,335. To find the growth rate, you take 68,872 minus 49,335 divided by 49,335 times 100%, that equals to 39.6%. Or equivalently, you take 68,872 divided by 49,335 minus 1, and then times 100%, that equals to 39.6%. This shows that real GDP per capita increased by nearly 40% over this 25-year period, indicating strong long-term economic growth. Inflation measures the percentage change in the general price level of goods and services over time. This graph shows the U.S. inflation rate based on the Consumer Price Index, CPI, adjusted to 2012 dollars. You can find this data on FRED by searching CPI, all items, and U.S. city average. For example, calculating the inflation rate from January 2020 to April 2025. Knowing CPI in April 2025 is 320.32 and CPI in January 2020 is 259.13. So to calculate the inflation rate, you take 320.32 minus 259.13 divided by 259.13 times 100%, that equals to 23.6%. Or equivalently, you take 320.32 divided by 259.13 minus 1, then overall times 100%, that equals to 23.6%. This means that over this 5-year period, prices increased by approximately 23.6%, reflecting the cumulative inflation in the U.S. economy. The unemployment rate, specifically the U3 measure, represents individuals in the labor force who are currently unemployed and have actively looked for work within the past 4 weeks. It is a key indicator of labor market health and overall economic performance. You can find this data on FRED by searching unemployment rate. For example, as of April 2025, the U.S. unemployment rate is reported at 4.2%. Economic models are one of the most important tools economists use. First, they are an abstraction of reality. That means they don't aim to capture every detail of the real world. Instead, they simplify, focusing on the most relevant elements. These simplified versions allow us to clearly analyze relationships between key economic variables. For example, we can study how interest rates affect investment or how taxes influence consumer spending. We use economic models to explain how the economy behaves, why inflation rises, what drives unemployment, and what causes long run growth. Most importantly, we use them to design and devise policies. Through models, we can simulate changes in policy and predict their likely outcomes, ultimately helping us make more informed decisions to improve economic performance. Section 2. Here we look at how economists think. We begin by looking at one of the most fundamental tools in economics, supply and demand, using pizza as our example. In this model, we assume the market is perfectly comparative, meaning that no single buyer or seller has the absolute power to influence the market price. Everyone is a price taker. We define several key variables in this model. QD, the quantity of pizza that buyers demand. QS, the quantity of pizza that producers are willing to supply. P, the price of pizza, determined at the intersection of supply and demand. Y, aggregate income, which affects consumers' ability to purchase pizza. PM, the price of materials, such as cheese, dough, and sauce, the inputs in the production process. By analyzing how these variables interact, we begin to understand how prices are set and how market outcomes are determined. Let's dive deeper into how economists model demand and supply, two of the most essential concepts in economic thinking. First, the demand for pizza, what we often call willingness to purchase, WTP. This relationship tells us how much pizza consumers are willing to buy based on the price of pizza and their income. We represent this formally as the quantity of pizza demanded, QD, depends on the price of pizza, P, and aggregate income, Y. In general notation, QD equals demand, a function of P and Y. A specific functional form, demand, a function of P and Y, equals 60 minus 10P plus 2Y. This means as price goes up, quantity demanded goes down. As income increases, demand increases. Now let's look at the supply of pizza, what we call willingness to sell, WTS. This shows how much pizza producers are willing to supply at different prices, depending on their cost. Specifically, the quantity supplied, QS, depends on the price of pizza, P, and the price of materials, PM, such as cheese and dough. In general notation, QS equals supply, a function of P and PM. A specific functional form, supply, a function of P and PM, equals 15P minus 2PM. This reflects that higher pizza prices encourage more production, while higher input costs reduce supply. Market equilibrium. You can now see how demand and supply interact using the diagram on the slide. The intersection of the demand and supply curves determines the equilibrium price and quantity in the pizza market. Let's look at two key scenarios that help us understand how changes in the economy affect market outcomes. First scenario, when income increases. Since income is the demand side factor, an increase in income leads to a rightward shift of the demand curve. Consumers now have more purchasing power, so they demand more pizza at every price level. As a result, this higher demand puts upward pressure on the price, causing the market price to rise. Second scenario, when the input price, that is, the price of materials like cheese, dough, or sauce, increases. This is a supply side component. Higher input costs make it more expensive to produce pizza, so the supply curve shifts leftward. Producers now supply less at each price level. Again, this results in higher prices in the market, but this time due to reduced supply rather than increased demand. Let's now talk about an important distinction economists make when building models: endogenous versus exogenous variables. Endogenous variables are those whose values are determined within the model. Exogenous variables are those whose values are determined outside the model. The model takes their values and behaviors as given. Let's apply this to the model of supply and demand for pizza. Exogenous variables are P, price of pizza, QD, quantity demanded for pizza, and QS, quantity supplied of pizza. Exogenous variables are Y, aggregate income, and PM, price of materials. This distinction helps us understand what the model is explaining, the endogenous variables, and what it treats as given, the exogenous variables, which is key to analyzing cause and effect in economics. We can explore how prices behave in economic models, specifically whether they are flexible or sticky. Market clearing is the assumption that prices are flexible and adjust to equate supply and demand. In the short run, many prices are sticky. They adjust sluggishly in response to changes in supply or demand. For example, many labor contracts fix the nominal wage for a year or longer. The behavior of the economy depends partly on whether prices are sticky or flexible. In the short run, when prices are sticky, markets may not clear, leading to imbalances between supply and demand. This helps explain phenomena such as unemployment resulting from an excess supply of labor, firms being unable to sell all the goods they produce. In the long run, when prices are flexible, markets tend to clear. This assumption is particularly appropriate for analyzing long-term economic issues such as real GDP growth. That shifts our focus to microeconomic thinking, how economists understand behavior at the level of households and firms. Microeconomics is the study of how individual decision makers, such as households and firms, make choices and interact in specific markets. It emphasizes the details of pricing, consumption, production, and resource allocation at a small scale. A central concept in microeconomics is optimization. Both households and firms are assumed to act in ways that best achieve their objectives, given the constraints they face. Their decisions are purposeful and responsive to trade-offs, rather than arbitrary. Consider the following examples. Households are typically modeled as maximizing their utility, a measure of satisfaction. For example, max U as a function of C and L. That means they choose the optimal combination of consumption C and leisure L, subject to a budget constraint determined by income and available time. Firms are modeled as maximizing profit. For example, max pi, where pi is the firm's profit, and it is subject to constraints such as available labor, capital, and other inputs. In both cases, mathematical tools are used to represent how rational agents make decisions under constraints. This forms the analytical core of microeconomic theory. Let's take a quick quiz to reinforce what we've learned. Question number 1. Recessions are periods of significant economic decline, often marked by widespread reductions in spending, employment, and production. Which of the following best captures a defining features of a recession? A recession is typically defined as a sustained period of declining economic activity, especially falling real incomes and employment, lasting for at least 2 quarters. Hence, the correct answer is B, a period of falling incomes for at least 2 consecutive quarters. Question number 2. Market clearing models assume that prices are what and are best applied to understand the economy in the short run. Market clearing models assume that prices adjust quickly to equate supply and demand. This assumption is more valid in the long run than in the short run, where prices may be sticky. Therefore, the correct answer is A. Prices are flexible and in the long run. Let's now apply the supply and demand model to the peanut butter market. Here you'll see 4 scenarios, each accompanied by a graph showing how the event affects equivalent price and quantity. For each event, ask yourself, does it affect the supply curve, the demand curve, or both, and in which direction does the shift occur? A. The invention of a new peanut grinding machine reduces production costs. This is a supply-side improvement. Lower production costs shift the supply curve to the right, as shown in the first graph. As a result, equivalent price falls and quantity increases. B. A drought drives up the price of peanuts, the key input. This increases production costs and shifts the supply curve to the left, as shown in the second graph. The outcome is a higher price and lower quantity. C. A hurricane destroys the grape crop, raising the price of grape jelly, a complement to peanut butter. As people buy less jelly, they also buy less peanut butter. This shifts the demand curve to the left, illustrated in the third graph. Both price and quantity decrease. D. A pandemic drives up the price of cheese, a substitute for peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. As grilled cheese becomes more expensive, peanut butter demand rises. The demand curve shifts to the right, shown in the fourth graph. Price and quantity both increase. E. In his model of the peanut butter market, the price of peanut butter is an endogenous variable. It's determined within the model. The price of cheese is an exogenous variable. It's determined outside the model. Understanding this distinction is key to interpreting economic models. Endogenous variables are explained by the system, while exogenous variables act as outside influences. After all, this lecture introduced the foundations of macroeconomic thinking. We explore key macroeconomic indicators such as GDP, inflation, and unemployment, and how economists use models to understand and predict economic outcomes. We then transition into core microeconomic concepts, focusing on how supply and demand determine market outcomes and optimization behavior by households and firms. The exercise on peanut butter gave us a hands-on way to apply the supply and demand framework and distinguish between endogenous and exogenous variables. By applying these concepts, you'll be better equipped to interpret economic events, policy impacts, and market behavior in both theoretical and real-world contexts.